I needed $3,800 to keep from losing my vision, but my own son Julian just laughed over the phone. "We just closed on our summer chalet, Dad," he said. "We can't spare a single dime right now." Before I could speak, his wife Clara snatched the receiver. "Stop calling my husband for handouts," she snapped, and the line went dead. 3 days later, that same son would be pounding on my front door, begging me to undo something he never imagined I'd have the courage to do. My name is Thomas Miller. I was 68, living alone in the small brick house in Canton, Ohio, where my late wife Evelyn and I had raised our family. For 40 years, I worked as a structural ironworker, climbing high steel beams in freezing winters and hot summers. I'd always been good with my hands, which made it harder to admit I could no longer trust my eyes. It started with blurry streetlights, then smeared numbers on the microwave. When I nearly stepped in front of a speeding truck, I finally saw a doctor. The diagnosis was severe progression of cataracts, requiring immediate surgery. The bill was $3,800 upfront. Technically, I had assets, a paid-off house and retirement funds, but they were locked up in trusts. My liquid savings had been wiped out by Evelyn's medical bills and replacing a leaking roof, and 4 years ago I had wired Julian $28,000 when his business went south, no questions asked. So, sitting at my kitchen table, I called him, but Julian was celebrating his new lake property with friends. When I asked for a short-term loan, his voice turned cold. "Dad, this is terrible timing," he said. When I explained that I could go blind, I heard Clara in the background whispering, "What does he want?" Then she took the phone. "Thomas, we have kids and 2 mortgages. You should have planned better. Stop asking my husband to clean up your mess." I waited for Julian to defend me. Instead, he just told her to hang up. I sat there in silence, feeling a deep, burning shame. I had worked overnight shifts just to buy him the things his friends had, and now he couldn't help me protect my eyes. But that afternoon, Julian didn't know what 30 years of my silent sacrifice had built. He didn't know about the amended documents, the lawyers, or the storm that was about to hit his life. At 6:30 that evening, my doorbell rang. It was Maya, my daughter. She wasn't my biological child, but when she saw the medical paperwork on my counter, she didn't hesitate. She pulled an envelope from her bag, dropped it on the table, and said, "Open this when I leave, and don't you dare try to hand it back." Inside was a cashier's check for exactly $3,800. A note read, "Dad, you never made me earn the right to be your daughter. Let me show up for you now." That check would save my eyesight, but the contrast between my 2 children broke my heart. Maya was 17 when my wife Evelyn first brought her home from a youth shelter. She had been in foster care for years, carrying all her belongings in a trash bag. She was quiet, defensive, and expected kindness to come with a hidden bill. When she accidentally backed our car into the garage wall, she shook and offered to leave. I simply handed her a flashlight and said, "You're holding this while we fix it." It took years for her to understand that mistakes didn't mean abandonment. Evelyn and I worked extra jobs to pay for her nursing school. When she turned 22, she officially asked us to adopt her at the local courthouse. She said she wanted to be a nurse because scared kids deserved at least one adult who didn't walk out of the room. Now Maya was the one saving me. She scheduled the surgery and stayed overnight to care for me. My son Julian sent a single, empty text message 5 days later. "Hope it went well. Busy here." He didn't ask if I could see. A week after the bandages came off, I felt strong enough to open Evelyn's old writing desk. In the bottom drawer inside a fireproof box was a letter she had left for me before she passed. Evelyn's elegant cursive print filled the page. She wrote about the house, the savings, and the true meaning of family. Her words were sharp, clear, and cut straight to my soul. She had known my weakness for giving Julian endless chances, and she gave me the strength to finally open my eyes. What she proposed in that letter was a complete rewrite of our family trust, a decision that would soon push Julian to the brink of panic. Evelyn's letter read, "Please don't divide what we built out of guilt. Leave what remains where you found loyalty, not where tradition tells you it belongs." The words stung, but they were true. I called our family lawyer, Daniel Mercer, and scheduled an urgent meeting. Inside his office, we looked over the trust Evelyn and I had created years ago. Our estate, the paid-off house in Canton, retirement funds, and land investments, was worth roughly $1.1 million. Under the old agreement, Julian was the executor, trustee, and primary heir. I realized with a chill that if I fell ill, Julian and his wife Clara would control my checkbook and decide if my health care was worth their money. "I want to change the trust," I told Daniel. I removed Julian from all positions of authority. I appointed Daniel's firm to manage the finances if I became incapacitated and designated Meyer as my sole healthcare representative. Finally, I adjusted the inheritance. 65%, including the brick ranch house, would go to Maya. Julian would receive 35%. I didn't want revenge. Julian was still my son. But I refused to depend on someone who viewed my survival as a financial inconvenience. Daniel asked if I wanted to discuss this with them first. No, I replied. If I invite them in before I sign, it becomes a negotiation. This is my decision. 3 weeks later, I called a family meeting in Daniel's conference room. Julian and Clara arrived wearing expensive designer clothes, looking confident, while Maya arrived late in her hospital scrubs, looking tired. They assumed we were updating standard paperwork, but the moment Daniel opened the folder and read the executed amendments aloud, the room temperature dropped to freezing. Julian glared at me, his face turning red. "You're putting Maya in charge of your life," he demanded. Clara looked at the attorney, her voice rising as she accused Maya of manipulating an old man. Maya herself sat in stunned silence, her face pale as she heard she was inheriting the house and the majority of the trust. But I sat at the head of the table, calm and resolved, ready to face the storm I had created. I looked directly at my son, waiting for the defense I knew he couldn't make. In the quiet of the conference room, Julian tried to defend himself. "We didn't have $3,800 sitting around, Dad," he yelled. "We were stretched thin with the closing costs on the lake cabin." I looked at him, feeling no anger, only a profound sadness. "You were stretched between a luxury vacation home and your father's eyesight," I said. "You made your choice." Clara turned on Maya, accusing her of playing the long game to steal the inheritance. But I reached into my coat pocket and placed Maya's empty envelope on the table. "She works 12-hour shifts," I told them. "She has her own mortgage and student loans. She didn't know about this trust. She didn't know I had a dime. She just heard I was scared and she showed up at my door." Julian had no answer. He looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Clara snapped her folder shut, whispering that this decision would destroy the family. "The paperwork didn't destroy this family, Clara," I replied quietly. "It only stopped me from pretending nothing had changed." They walked out, slamming the heavy glass door behind them. For the next 3 days, my house was silent. I spent the time reading the paper with my newly restored vision, feeling a strange mixture of grief and relief. But the quiet didn't last. On Saturday morning, just after 8 o'clock, a desperate, heavy pounding shook my front door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was the sound of someone in pure panic. I pulled the curtain aside and saw Julian standing on the porch, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes red from lack of sleep, holding the copy of the amended trust papers in his trembling hand. I opened the door slowly. He stood there shivering in the morning air, looking completely defeated. "Dad, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We need to talk. This has gone completely out of hand." I stepped back and let him cross the threshold. As he walked into the living room, he looked around at the childhood home he had taken for granted, realizing that the locks on his future had been changed forever. We sat at the kitchen table, and the look in his eyes told me he was finally ready to tell the truth. Julian sat across from me at the kitchen table, looking smaller than he ever had. "You changed everything because of one phone call," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't just the phone call, Julian," I replied. "It was the silence that followed. It was the fact that you assumed someone else would take care of me." Older people view loneliness differently. It's not about being alone, it's about becoming invisible. Everyone assumes someone else called, someone else visited, someone else bought the medicine. Eventually you vanish. Julian stared into his coffee mug. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed him, but apologies are easy when the consequences arrive. He begged me to change the paperwork back. He even offered to give up his share of the inheritance entirely just to prove he cared. "The paperwork stays exactly where it is," I told him. "If I change it back, neither of us will ever know if you stayed because you love me or because of what you might inherit." He closed his eyes, the truth of my words sinking in. "You haven't lost everything, Julian. You still have your family, your health, and 35% of an estate you never earned, but you have lost control over my life." We began the long process of rebuilding. He didn't fix it with a grand gesture. He started fixing it over 100 ordinary days. He called just to hear my voice. He visited without mentioning lawyers. He came over to help me repair a leaning fence post in the backyard, sweating under the sun just to spend time with his old man. I learned that forgiveness does not require handing someone the same power they once abused. Boundaries are not cruelty. Love can leave a door unlocked without surrendering the keys to the whole house. Today, my vision is clear. I can see the red on the robin's chest, the green leaves on the maple tree, and most importantly, I can finally see the true faces of the children I raised. Maya still visits every Sunday, bringing her laughter and warmth into the quiet rooms. She's the keeper of our family's heart, just as Evelyn wanted. And Julian still knocks on my door every weekend, learning how to be a son again. We are still repairing what broke, one coffee at a time. But now, when I look at the mantle photograph of my sweet Evelyn, I can see her eyes smiling back at me, knowing that the legacy we built is finally safe where it belongs.